This is Audiovisual Cultures, the podcast that explores different areas of the arts and cultural production with me, Paula Blair. Visit patreon.com/AV Cultures to find out more and to join the pod. Hello, thank you for tuning in to another Audiovisual Cultures podcast. My guest today has been mentioned before. If you recall episode 77 with Joanna Leach talking about the Amabe project, today's guest is one of the contributing artists, and I am really very pleased to speak with Clinton Kirkpatrick. Very warm welcome, Clinton. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm not too bad. You're joining us from Belfast, is that right?
I am, yes. I live over in East Belfast, so I'm at home today, yeah.
Lovely. Yeah, I'm from East Belfast and I'm a bit homesick for it at the minute. Clinton, could I ask you to be so kind as to give us a bit of an overview of your work, because you work in a lot of different ways and with different media and lots of things. So could you just give us a bit of an overview on how you would describe your practice?
Yeah, sure. So I've always kind of said that I'm first and foremost like a painter. And whilst that still comes into my mind every time I'm asked this question, I now do a lot of other things within my practice as well. So there's a lot of printmaking, a lot of drawing, and then more recently, lots of collage in my work, really since last summer. And then this year, I'm hoping to kind of take my work into a slightly different direction again and introduce animation and moving image into my practice. So I'm next week actually just beginning to learn around animation, because I've always been able to kind of see my work moving in my mind. I create lots of characters, so I kind of can always see them moving in my mind. So I kind of want to, actually see what that might look like. So my work is, it's quite broad. My interests are quite broad, fundamentally really interested in the human. I'm really interested in how we function, both individually, but also collectively within society. So if you kind of look through my work, there is a lot of character that come into that. There's a lot of strange situations or lots of play, lots of absurd notions, and I kind of have fun. I jest. I almost kind of soak in everything around me and then chew it all up and then sort of spit it back out, and that's kind of what you see with my work. Yeah, and lots of color. I love color.
Very bold color, I think, is a good way of describing it. I think it's fair to say that your work is distinctive. It's really quite I want to use the word weird, but I'm meaning it in a really positive sense. And I love weird. It takes the body and fragments it, but yet, so you'll take feet or legs or eyes and you'll put them in different positions. I mean, there's something harking back to surrealism, but it's not quite that. And it's not reproducing that. There's a hint of it, but it's doing something different. I mean, what do you think about those sorts of ideas?
I'm an advocate of the sort of weird and wonderful. Certainly I would agree there is a touch of surrealism in my work, but I almost look at myself as an artist in a contemporary climate where, I don't know, it's I think we live today in a space where you can kind of pick and choose and take whatever you want, and you don't have to fit within one genre or the other. I think that's what my work is. I mean, if you look through some of my work, you'll see that I do quite detailed portraits or drawings of people, and then on the flip side, my work would be quite cartoonish, and I don't need myself as an artist to be recognized as any one thing, and I think within me, all of this exists. So, that's kind of what I want to kind of put back out to the viewer. I think also, as an artist, you're always kind of grappling with what it is you want to talk about, what it is you should be talking about, or how your work should look. And certainly, I think that things identify you as an artist, but I don't think it should be definitive, if that makes sense. I don't think it should be something that, is so written in stone that you don't have room to move. So I really love to play with the work. You said there about kind of taking pieces. I mean, it's literally kind of strip the body apart, rip the body apart. Eyes are a massive thing in my work. I think years ago, I first really started noticing the introduction of eyes in my work. And it wasn't really until other people started to comment, they're like, oh, well, why are all of these eyes in your work? And I was like, oh, there's lots of eyes in my work. It was sort of done on a more subconscious level. And then I started to really notice that I was always going to the eyes. And I guess I kind of see the eyes as like an entrance. It's almost like it's a window into whatever is going on in the rest of the image. It gives a connection to something human. And even, when you look through my work, characters can appear alien-like or they're so strange, but there's always the nod to the human. It sort of gets back to like, I like the weird, I like the absurd. I use the word absurd in my work all the time, and it can be as absurd as it needs to be. So I'm okay with that.
Yeah, you seem to have a lot of beings, shall we say, that are maybe legs joined together and then they're just covered in eyes. There is something a bit, I suppose it's almost like maybe a child's drawing of an alien or something, when we would imagine creatures from outer space and things. That's quite fun. It could be me and my research background, but when I see lots of eyes, I think of surveillance and I think of watching and the paintings looking back at me and things. I mean, what would you say about that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting comment. I am a watcher. I am somebody who looks at people, I look at the world, I look at the different spaces that we kind of all cohabit. I watch, and perhaps it is a little bit of a nod to, that sort of idea that within my practice, like I'm looking at all things all the time. That sort of gets back in my mind at the minute to kind of the ideas of identity and stuff. And whilst we can define ourselves as one thing or the other, I sometimes find that very problematic because we live in a world with so many different types of people. What I mean by that is like, I like looking at all of those different types of people. I don't need to be in one space or the other. It can be right down to kind of like the most hateful people. I also enjoy watching that because I feel like I learn a lot from that, and I feel like I can take into my work. And it's the power of the artist, I guess. You have the ability to talk about challenging things or strange things, or whatever. You have the power within you to put back out whatever you want and have a real conversation with society and with people, with the world.
You mentioned as well, I had a good dig around on your website, and you do mention that about you're looking at the individual, but you're also trying to look at broader society in that work. Would you maybe have any examples from your work that demonstrate that kind of idea, that do both at the same time?
You mean looking at like an individual and looking at a scenario?
I guess, yeah. What are you getting at when you point out that you're looking at society, and as you say, there's so many different kinds of people and you've got so many different shapes of being in your work. I look at them a lot on Instagram and I think, well, oh, that's a funny looking creature. Oh, but it's looking at me, and maybe it's thinking, oh, what a funny looking creature.
Yeah, maybe they are alive somewhere. I don't know. Yeah, I guess, a lot of kind of my work a lot of it does come from my own experience. And I guess I'm thinking now back to 10 years ago, I first went overseas, and I sort of talk about this a lot, and I'm moving away from talking about it now because it was a period of my life where it happened and I had a remarkable kind of like introduction and learning around my work. But, that very kind of explicit white man role within a Black society really became a prevalent conversation in my work because I went to Kenya originally as a volunteer, but throughout that experience, I became entirely connected. I looked at what I think originally I didn't understand. I was naive, I guess, because I was just like, oh, I'm in a new part of the world and I'm meeting amazing people and, I'm seeing an amazing space without really understanding the intricacy to do with Black, white culture and, white man or, whatever privilege means, but indirectly a lot of that started to come into my work. So it was a huge conversation for 8 years of my life, was this massive learning around, me as a white man in a Black society and what that meant and white privilege. And then of course today we're seeing huge, it's always been there, but like that really huge Black Lives Matter movement, which is so important, and all of this. So kind of my work would comment and has commented on sort of things like that, and also, I'm gay, so like my work kind of quite often, looks at homosexuality or identity, for want of a better kind of term there. And like right now, it's the February 2021. It's our February. Each year is LGBT History Month. So I've decided this month I am actually going to explore avenues around what it is, because I don't know if I necessarily think about it all the time, because I don't care to think about the fact that I'm gay. It's just not for me. It's like not something that is an issue. But it's like, for me, I want to learn, I want to kind of put in. So like, yeah, so I'm creating I'm always kind of like doing a bit of research at the minute, and then I'm imagining that lots of characters and situations might come out of that. But we'll see. But yeah, so I kind of dip in and out as sort of as and when, or whatever's presented. I mean, I think that's kind of a great thing about the world today is, you're reminded quite often of what's going on because of social media, or if there's a specific time, that is being celebrated or commented on, I will link into things like that as well. Sorry, I kind of maybe went off in a bit of a waffle there.
That's fine. That's what this is all about. Take a walk with your ideas. So just to try then to tie that in with the different approaches to practice that you make. So if you're dealing with those kinds of ideas, quite big ideas about human and identity and seeing and looking and watching, and then you're working across painting, drawing, collage, printmaking, and you say you're going to move into animation, which will be amazing because if you can give life and kineticism to those images, because some of them do feel like they're in mid-stride or something, so it'd be amazing to see that come to life. I mean, do you have any ideas on how the different media that you work in, how that informs maybe the sorts of themes and topics that you're getting into in your work?
Yes, I mean, I think early in my career, early in my thinking, I was like, I'm a painter. And early on, I mean, I'm still in love. I'm actually probably more in love with painting now than what I've ever been. I think part of that is to do with now that I'm really starting to understand the material, really understanding what I need to do on a canvas. And I'm also reaching much better results much more quickly. So like there's just this fundamental love of paint that kind of exists within me. And I knew that early on. I mean, going through school, I gravitated towards painting and drawing. I love drawing as well. And then I left, and of course, through college and through foundation, it was painting, and my end shows were always painting. And I was like, right, I have to go for a painting and drawing degree because I didn't want to go back into like a fine applied art degree because I was like, I don't need to waste another year. So I went into painting. My degree was actually in painting and drawing. There was one of two left in the UK at the time. So I went to England for that. Part of me always kind of put that label on myself at the beginning. So I don't know if I was as open or as receptive to other avenues within my practice. Continued with that, painter. And then it wasn't literally until I was overseas. I was in Kenya, and I'd sort of been in and out of Kenya. And I think it was the second time I was in Kenya. I literally went to an organization to introduce myself called Cool Trust. And the next day I got an email through offering out this printmaking course to the public, which was like in woodcut print. And I was like, I've been really wanting to introduce a print technique into my work. And therein lay my introduction to print. And it was woodcut. And I just absolutely fell in love with that process, which made me then go and investigate other types of printmaking. So now within my practice, I still use woodcut. Funny, I haven't made one in a while. I was literally saying to myself yesterday that I really want to do a new woodcut. So I have wood sitting downstairs. So I'm kind of thinking around that now, but I still do the woodcut. Monotype because it is very painterly, so again gets back to that kind of notion of painting, and then things like a little bit of etching or dry point, and that would be kind of what I focus on. I've learned other things as well, but I'm just not as interested in things like screen print or the litho or things like that. So that was my introduction into print. And then as my practices started to grow, I just naturally started to become so much more interested in other things. Last year, collage became this massive part of my practice where I was just like, this is really cool. Just like ripping stuff up and sticking it down and building layers. And cyanotype printmaking was another process where I really became attached to that. But I was using cyanotype in a very, very painterly way. So I was actually making the solution and painting with the solution and exposing my drawings or my paintings to the sun. And then that's what kind of creates the cyanotype. And then I would work over the top. And that's kind of how the collage came in. I would work over the top of that in drawings. And then I was like starting to rip stuff up. And then I made this massive, this time last year, I began making this like 28-foot piece of work. It's rolled up in a room there. But so it's kind of like it's led me on. And then also with the animation now, I've always been able to visualize my characters moving. And I've almost wanted to be able to look around them. I'm making them from the side to the front, but I'm kind of like, what do they look like from behind? I don't know. In my mind's eye, it's like, what way is is going to go, I don't know. But in my mind's eye, it's kind of, I'm going to see them from all angles or spaces, which would be interesting.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting exploration to do. You seem to have been really prolific in the past year. Certainly, I mean, following you on Instagram, you're always putting up new things that you're working on and exploring and stuff. And it's so great to hear that you're still energized and you're moving into these different areas with it. I mean, I was wondering, because it's come up a lot, of course it has, with people I've been speaking to recently, how anybody's had to adapt their work in the past year. And I know that you've done a lot of community work in the past. Would you like to talk a bit about that? Because your own practice seems to be really taking off lately, but the other part of your artist life, how are things going there with that sort of work?
Yeah, I think the whole coronavirus experience for all of us has been so remarkably individual and different for everybody. And I know for me, it's been a very interesting time. I've, like the rest of us, I've dipped in and out of mood. I had an extraordinarily difficult year last year in many ways. But what I realized was one of my main difficulties is when you're an artist and you're making, and the other side of my work, thankfully, is community arts. And I get to be able to pay my bills, usually through community arts. And then I get to spend the rest of my time in the practice. So my whole life is consumed with art. And I love the community arts. Having that kind of stripped away last year so abruptly was kind of shocking. And it was like, wow, you find yourself in this space that is just so unusual. And I realized that for me, when you don't earn heaps of money and you're kind of like keeping things going along on a very thin wire as it is. And then when you have that stripped away, it was extraordinarily difficult to come to terms with like, how am I going to be able to cope through this period of time? Because I literally found myself with no income and not getting any reduction in rent or anything. It was just like, so like the bills need paid, your rent needs paid, you need electricity or food. So for me, I was like, right, well, how are we going to kind of like, how am I going to do this? Thankfully, the Arts Council came out with their support and I availed of their first round of funding. And I literally wrote a project that was to be delivered online. So it was exploring these new ways of working and looking at how to work as an artist. And I am glad to say that I delivered over the space of kind of 3-4 months a remarkable project. I mean, I'd introduced into my own practice previously the idea of what I call sky drawings that are kind of like, I've been making cutouts basically, and they're little pieces that you would find in my paintings of characters or eyes or whatever. But I had been photographing those. So they are cutouts. I color them black or spray paint them, or have used kind of like an oil stick. And then I drop those. I hold out at arm's length and I drop those. But I photograph it at the moment where the sky is literally kind of framing the drawing. And they turned out to kind of be like, they look just so impactful and so interesting. And I was like, this is great. So I could maybe try and do this as a community project. So I wrote a community project, and thankfully, Eastside Arts helped me to advertise that. And I managed to get about 15 people onto the program. And over the space of a few months, I delivered this really class project where they all made quite large drawings. And then what I did was I got them to all I did the sessions like this at home on Zoom. And then when they finished their drawing, I either collected or got them to post me their drawing. I took their drawing and I made the cutout from it. And then I went around places around East Belfast and photographed them. And it was just lovely. I'm still in love with lots of the imagery that kind of come out of that. And I would like in the future, when things open up, to maybe put on a little bit of an exhibition around it or things like that. So for me, it was like looking for ways to kind of do stuff, and then started up with a little bit of work again towards December, but then that all cancelled with new lockdowns around Christmas and, well, that came in on Boxing Day. So I find myself still without work now, although February is looking like we're going to try and do some more online stuff with the likes of Seacourt down in Bangor. To talk about kind of my work as an artist through that and kind of my I've always been somebody who is making. So I have tried to remain busy this year. I've had my moments of there's been times where I'm not, but I find for me that, my studio, I think as an artist, you have to make the work. If you're a maker, if you're a creator, you have to do the work. If you're calling yourself an artist, but you're not making the work, I don't really get it. It's okay. Look, I know we all work at different speeds. I don't mean to kind of I'm not trampling over people there, but for me, I know that my approach and my thinking around being an artist is that if I don't make this work, the work is not going to exist, or what's in me is not going to be out where it needs to be. So I kind of try to keep myself active and I try to be there. But also I have been very fortunate to have my studio space, which is private. So I've been able to go there. I've been able to work and not see anybody. I come back to the house and not see anybody. So it's been this kind of like exchange where it's isolation, but I have my space to work because I would not have been able to work in this house. So I'm quite, I'm somebody who's always making and I draw every day. And, I kind of think I like to keep myself busy because there's a lot going on in this brain, so I have to try and do it somewhere.
Gosh, that's brilliant. It'd be great to then hear if those new projects work out okay for you. I really hope they do. It was a real joy seeing a lot of the images again on Instagram of the sky drawings. And so I really recommend people go and check those out because they're a really lovely thing to sit and look at, I think. Would you like to talk a bit about some of the exhibitions that you've had in the past, in the before times? Because you mentioned being in Kenya and you have had some collaborative exhibitions, is that right, in Nairobi, and then you've exhibited quite a lot in Northern Ireland as well in different places. So would you like to talk us through some of those? And I've written down Borrowed Tales and Life and Other Fictions, and I ask you, do you believe in miracles? Just even the titles of your exhibitions are quite intriguing.
I love titling my exhibitions. I really do. It's like, I literally just the other day have decided that I've started compiling the list of every title of my exhibitions because I wanted to have a look at what I went back to the very first exhibition I put on, which was through university, and it was called Unprotected. And then I came home and I had a first exhibition in Belfast in 2009. And I can't really remember the title of it, but the next one was called Yesterday's News. And then that one, I ask you, do you believe in miracles? So that it's nice to kind of like look, I love titling my exhibitions, but the title is always in reference to the work that I'm making or what's going on in the work or my mind at that time. It's not always kind of like the title of a painting or whatever. It's just sort of almost like generally summing things up. I love putting my work on in exhibitions. I always organize 2 events with openings because, the first one is the opening, which is kind of like that you have to do that. And then the second, I always organize now. I organize a talk with my exhibitions, and I love the talk because you get a group of people there that actually want to hear about the work and they want to ask you questions. And I love that experience. I don't really enjoy openings, and I don't even really enjoy openings of other artists' work. I would prefer to go and spend time with the work later on. But don't get me wrong, I do go, and support my friends and support people. But I think just that, the preference in me is to go and really enjoy the work or enjoy hearing about the work. I've showed ever since leaving university. I threw myself into my practice whenever I came home. So I actually lived away for like 6 years and then finally came back, and I've been here ever since. I've been home about 11 years now and decided to move home and get roots and get a space here where I was grounding myself a little bit. But right from the year after arriving home, I had my first exhibition in a gallery. It's now closed, called the Safe House Gallery, which was on Donegal Street in Belfast there. And a wonderful eccentric man called Danny Burke was the guy that kind of offered me the first space. And then I did a little bit of help with that gallery. But that was kind of a nice thing because it was nice, right? I'm going to put on work. Now, the work was really terrible. It was really bad painting, hands up. We all go through these kind of processes, but the ideas were great. Paintings were bad. The ideas were great. I had that show, and then I had a second show in that same gallery in the next year. And then it was the year after that, 2011, that I first went. I had just this mad year of just people dying, jobs ending. I had a car crash. I'll not go through everything that happened. It was just like this year's stuff. And I kind of cleared off then. I was like, right, I just want to go and do something for somebody else. So I kind of went and did some volunteering in another country, which happened to be Kenya. But what that did was it ignited in me everything about what I loved in the world and everything about what I loved in people, and ignited this kind of like real investigation into who I am and where I am. So ever since then, I was back, and then I had my first big exhibition in Belfast, which was in the Waterfront Hall. And that was in March 2012, so 10 years next year. And I filled that whole upstairs space with work, and I was making like 5 and 6 foot paintings. And I still make large paintings now, but it was just so lovely to be making the size of work that I wanted to make. And it was all about Kenya. It was all about my experience there, a real mix of work. And I did portraiture, and I did, abstract pieces in that, and then lots of figurative stuff too. That began then this real interaction and play with me in and out of Kenya. And it was like I went back as an artist, and then I came home and I made another exhibition which went on display in Lisburn in the Island Art Centre, and that was 2013. Then I applied to the museum in Kenya, so there's the National Museums of Kenya, to display the work that I had made over the previous number of years. That was accepted, and then I found myself back in Kenya in 2014 for my first exhibition in the National Museum there, which was a really wonderful experience. Just wonderful. Every time I was there, it was very, very different. But taking the work that I'd made, and I always remember like Lydia Galavu, who is the curator there. She still works, the most wonderful woman. She came up to me after I had hung the work in the show, and she said, looking at your work, it's like you wouldn't necessarily think that you were a white artist. That always kind of stayed with me, because like I'm always interested in this idea of what identity is. And, I think it's like there is color in my work and boldness and character and whatever. And I was like, I find it as such a compliment. And it was just such a lovely time, and I had a lovely feedback from that show, and it was nice. It was validating for me, like this is the type of artist that I am, and this is what I need to be doing. So yes, I continued with shows then, both at home here, looking sort of more local sort of spaces, and then Downpatrick, and then Art Centre, and lots of spaces like that. Then I went back to Kenya. I ended up organising an exhibition at home here with my woodcut teacher, who was Kenyan, so John Kamani. And off the back of that, Lydia at the museum had wrote this very brief message under some post on Facebook saying Kenya 2.0 question mark or something like that. And I was like, so there's the seed. That's all I needed to plant that seed, which grew into another wonderful flower for me. So then I went back, I found myself back conducting more research. So I went back the year, what year was that? 2016. I went back to Kenya again, and this time I removed myself from the investigation, so it was nothing to do with me. So I took a camera. I went for a month, 2 months, but a month I spent, a month and a half I spent kind of collecting imagery and oral voice recordings, and I recorded stories. So I went around people I knew, loads of people that I didn't, and I asked them to tell me a story. There was no prescribed theme. It's interesting kind of watching how people struggle with kind of, some people are like, I'm going to tell you the longest, biggest story. And then some are like, what do you want me to tell you? It's like, it was interesting kind of like watching that, but it was so open. But what I wanted to do was on purpose remove me from, I wanted this to be entirely, yes, it was going to be a white man's kind of visual remaking of stories, but I just wanted to listen to stories. And that made me realize my interest and love for storytelling and storytelling through my work. So yeah, so I went back then and had a joint exhibition in Kenya in 2018, which was that show again with John Kamani, but I put on that show with all of that work with the oral kind of stories. And then I came back and I had a show here called Borrowed Tales, which you mentioned, and that was all those woodcuts. So I actually made 88. I recorded 88 stories and I made 88 pieces of work. One piece of work for every single story that I recorded, and I put them all on display. So it was lovely. It's a lovely exhibition.
That's such a lovely thing to hear about, really. I think I saw on your website you described your painting process as a process of storytelling as well. So it's really lovely to hear about how you reach that. Do you think that's something that comes through right across your work, that there are stories contained in your images?
Yes, and I think more so now than ever, because you can look back at my work from 10 years ago and see everything that's going on in it now. I've started to create this world, and everything that I make is contained within that world.
I'm recalling certain images of yours, and I'm thinking it's like you're getting a fragment of a whole landscape and a whole thing that's going on in this. How would you respond to that? How would you flesh out some of those ideas?
I've realized now that storytelling is much more integral than what I maybe even really understood it to be. I view my work as this world that I'm creating, and that everything that I make and put into that is adding to that, or a discovery of a new piece of that world. I mentioned earlier on, but it's a very broad world, so it's almost like I'll make things and then all of a sudden there might be crossover years later, or I'll revisit. So I kind of make lots of characters in my work that signify certain things, and then they'll come back into my mind or they'll crop up later on. I mean, there's been a couple of characters. So like there's one that I call Rainbow Mouth. He's this kind of blind character. I don't even know if he's blind in the original one, but he's been blind later on. But the original character was just this very kind of solemn, not beautiful character. He's just kind of very dull in a sense, but inside his mouth was this rainbow space. And then he sort of existed in a show that I put on in the Ulster Museum, not the Ulster Museum, sorry, the Ulster Hall years ago. And that was his introduction, but he's always kind of cropped back in. So I then, a couple of years later, took him on a journey and actually explored who this character was. So still today, I'll revisit him at times. He'll kind of like come in. There's another character called All Eyes. I mean, I did this other drawings recently that were incorporating this character, and he's just covered in eyes. And that kind of character was born out of this idea of being able to see all things at all times. And I'm not saying that these characters are all me, but they certainly can be sometimes a reflection of me, or of elements of my psyche or the way I see things. So I'm somebody who I feel I'm able to look at many things and hold many things. Even I don't have to agree with them all, but I'm able to see them, if that makes sense. I'm quite a perceptive person. So a lot of my work is I've realized that there's this overarching kind of story behind a lot of it. And I don't need it to be a story book where it is like, this is what the story is. I want the viewer, and I need the viewer to see and deal with things how they need to deal with them. In the last 6 months, I used to title, and funny, I'm just this morning like editing images for a new book, and I realized that halfway through last year, a mentor I had a couple of years ago was like, you're titling all of your work and you're giving the viewer everything the viewer needs. He was like, what about untitling your work, presenting your work in an untitled kind of way? So that sat with me for a while, and then I began to introduce that in my work halfway through last year, where I was like, right, I'm just not putting a title with this. So what it did was kind of like take away, my meaning, and it just allowed the characters or the situation to stand on their own. So it was an important kind of moment, but I'm also ready to be titling the work again, but also to kind of like start to not be as direct with the title, or to give a nod to something where it's not as specific, or it is not as definitive as kind of giving everything that you need. Does that make sense? It's sort of, yeah. So it's kind of like, for me, there is I've realized a lot of power in storytelling, and even what I'm doing now in my own research and in my own investigation is I've gone right back to what mythology is, and then within mythology what creation myths are. And I'm actually in the process of investigating various creation myths that have existed throughout human history in all different cultures. And what I'm doing is I'm taking pieces of that, whether it is modern day creation myths or Egyptian creation myths or whatever the creation myth is. I mean, there's these slug characters keep coming into my work, and I read this creation myth recently where these slugs fall from the sky and they create this boggy, marshy area, and then from this the first humans came to be. And I'm just like, this is thrilling. It is the power of storytelling, it's the power of art. For me, that is what my work is. People will look at my work and they're like, what is that? Or you're mad. Or I've listened to it all over the years. I don't really care either, but it's like, I've listened to it all. But I always think if you take the time with any artist, you have to be interested obviously in what they're doing to want to investigate it. But certainly for me, when you start to investigate what my work is and what my practice is, there is a whole lot there. There's a whole lot of world, and a whole lot of world to see, and there's a whole lot more still to come out of me, but we'll see, hopefully.
I do love your slug in space images. I think they're really cool.
And I read the other day, bugs have 4 noses, or 4 kind of like things to smell from. So I'm just like loving that. It's like, I started the painting last week, with a slug with like, and I've taken a human nose. But obviously a slug does not have a human nose, but in my painting. So it's like, that's what I do. I hear things, or I see things, or I read things, and I just, if it resonates within me in some way, I kind of like to kind of spit it back out in a fun way. I take the piss, I think, a little bit, a lot of, I do jest, but I think with that humor, it's a way for me to navigate this world that we're in. And I like to laugh, and I like, I want, I guess, a little bit of that to kind of come through in my practice as well.
Yeah, I think you definitely need the bit of joy in there. And I think to embrace the strangeness, the absurdity, and let it make you smile and put those blockers, that stuff away, I think is really important. So you mentioned there that you're working on a new book project. What book projects have you done before? And can you tell us a bit about what's coming in the future? share?
Absolutely. So partially kind of through this lockdown thing, I was like, right, I don't have access to, our normal kind of way, my normal way of doing things where it was sort of putting exhibitions on or traveling with my work or whatever. Obviously that's all on hold and it's very difficult to sort of plan. So I was kind of starting to think in my mind, I was like, well, what other things can I do through this time that's keeping me busy, keeping me active? So I have been drawing every day now since the beginning of 2017. So I'm actually into my 5th year of drawing every single day. I have not missed a day, maybe one day, but I have not really missed any, many days. And actually now I do a couple of drawings a day. And that is kind of a lot of what you're seeing through that kind of feed on Facebook or on Instagram. You've got this sort of like, it's almost like a digital gallery for me. And it's a space to kind of do sketches and put ideas. So the book project, this will be my 2nd book. So my first book, it's called Worldview from a White Picket Fence. And that first book was drawings from my first year of drawing with digital media, because I moved into using an iPad to draw with. Never used digital media before, always was pretty anti it. And then I was like, God, we're living in such a digital age. Why am I not beginning to introduce that into my practice? It just seemed silly. But then I realized that I was making all of this work and it was getting lost. So there's something really ephemeral or transient about things get lost in Instagram or forgotten about, or they become some sort of like old dusty relic in the bottom of the basement. For me, I started to find that very problematic. So I did this sort of first year of drawings and I really want to make a book and put some of these digital drawings in the book. So the first book was all black and white images. And then the second year from 2018, I started to introduce both black and white images and color images into that digital drawing. So I've realized it's been 3 years since I made that book. And I was like, can I make another book? So it's trying to get the money. Obviously these things kind of cost money and things are kind of always, they're quite tight at the moment, but I'm looking for ways to kind of bring this into life. And I've literally just gone from 2,000 images to 88 images, maybe slightly more, but 90 images. And I was like, how do I edit this down? Because then what I did was I went back through that history, that catalog, and I laughed and I thought, these are great drawings, but nobody gets to see them and I don't get to hold them. So I kind of really wanted, I want to be able to hold the work. I resonate with books. I have books everywhere in this house. I love art books. I love reference books. I love being able to kind of like delve into different artists and different days. So that's for me, and I kind of want my work in that sort of format as well. So they're self-published. I'm self-publishing. I self-published the first one. I'll be doing the same with this one. But yeah, so I'm kind of just cracking on. So doing a written piece for it myself. I've inviting another artist to kind of do a written piece as well. And you get a bit of text and thinking behind the work and the drawing. But yeah, so hopefully later on this year, I might have a digital launch party for a new book, but we'll see.
How exciting. I love that idea of holding the work. That's so nice. Such a lovely way of thinking about it. Keep us informed if you do have a digital launch. That'd be so fun. When you were talking earlier about gallery openings and things, it just made me realize that I missed that. You always need to go back and look at the exhibition again, but it's about being with the people, isn't it? And I do miss a good Belfast opening.
Oh, it's such strange times, yeah. And I just miss being able to go and do those things, anything cultural. Like we know that kind of the culture is like just one of the things always the hardest hit, but it's hopefully something for the future for all of us.
Yeah, definitely. We've got through a lot and you've been so generous about talking about the personal aspects of your work and your practice and everything. Is there anything that we haven't touched on yet today that you would like to mention?
Maybe kind of thinking around advice or, what it is for younger people. I certainly think for young people, even going through university at the moment, what a very difficult time it is. It's difficult for everybody, but I know I have friends of mine in doing masters at the minute and over in the mainland UK, and I mean it's this storm of uncertainty. Maybe do a little bit of discussing around kind of like what it is to advise artists or advise people. I always kind of think make your work. I'm just a big advocate of really encouraging people to kind of like make and do the work that they need to be doing. So you can, if you're in university or whatever, just make the work. I think you can become so consumed by what's happening and how that's affecting you that you forget that you're an artist, you forget that you're making. So make the work, and find your way and your pathway through that. maybe I'm waffling.
No, I think that's really so helpful. That's a really excellent point to make, is just do something every day. Just try to do something, even if it's just a little sketch or cutting up bits of paper, whatever it is, just do something. That proactivity, I think, is really, really important. And I think even just in terms of your mental well-being.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I think for anybody, even not just anybody at school or college, it's engaging in the arts and engaging in that kind of activity is extremely beneficial. And it really is a form of therapy, and you can kind of engage in something for 15 minutes, half an hour a day, and it really, really helps. So, there's a real power behind the arts. And fortunately, we're all too aware that the arts are the first to get shafted. But anyway, it's an interesting time for sure. But just keep making. I think everybody should be making or find a space to make.
That's a really excellent point. So, Clinton, do you have websites and socials that you'd like to point people towards?
Yeah, so I actually have two websites now. I realized, so I've got my main website, which is clintonkirkpatrick.com. It's almost like that sort of showcase of a little bit of history of my work. And then I started a new website this year called Orange Paint Books, and it's going to operate as a background to a selling platform for me. So it's a space now where I'm putting up all of my work for sale. Because I realized through this time as well, you're relying quite often on galleries or other spaces to be doing a lot of the work for you. And I was just like, do you know what? Why am I not in charge of my work being for sale? So I created orangepaintbooks.com, and that is going to be where you can find everything I do, from courses to the paintings to the drawings, whatever. And then pretty much the main one that I use is Instagram. So my social handle is Clinton_Kirkpatrick_artist, but just type in my name there and you'll find me. That's the main ones.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. Clinton Kirkpatrick, thank you so very much for your time. I have really enjoyed our conversation. It's been so lovely to speak with you properly and to meet you like this and to hear all about your work, because I've so enjoyed following you on Instagram for the past lot of months. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's been brilliant.
Thank you very much. I got introduced to your podcast from Joanna's one whenever she was doing the Amobi project. So it's been lovely to kind of follow, and I've linked in. So thank you for having me, and all the best for the year ahead. Okay.
Yeah, same to you. Thanks. We'll keep in touch.
All the best. Thanks.
This has been a Cozy Pea Pod production with me, Paula Blair. The music is Common Ground by Airtone, used under a Creative Commons 3.0 non-commercial license, and is downloadable from ccmixter.org. Episodes release every other Wednesday. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your podcasts. See the show notes for a video link if you need auto captions. Be part of the conversation with AV Cultures on Facebook and Twitter, or AV Cultures Pod on Instagram. As well as Patreon membership, one-off support is appreciated at buymeacoffee.com/PEA Blair. I produce and edit the show by myself, and I am grateful for any support for this work. For more information and episode links, visit audiovisualcultures.wordpress.com. Thank you so much for listening. Catch you next time.